My ex-wife sued me for half my business, telling the judge, I built that company with him. I let her list everything she claimed she'd done for 12 years. Then my lawyer asked her one question. Her own attorney immediately asked for a recess. I watched my ex-wife raise her right hand and swear to tell the truth, and the strange thing was, for just a second, I believed she meant it. It was 9:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in Denver District Court, courtroom 4C, and Renata was wearing the navy blazer she used to wear for her old marketing job, the one she hadn't worked in 11 years. She sat in the witness box with her hands folded like she was posing for a photo, and when her attorney asked her to describe her role in Buildingfeld architecture, she looked past him, straight at me, and said, I built that company with him. My lawyer didn't object. She didn't even look up from her legal pad. She just wrote something down and let Renata keep talking. I didn't know it yet, but the 3 manila folders sitting in my lawyer's briefcase, unopened, would end this case before the lunch recess. Renata didn't know it either. For the next 40 minutes, she got to say whatever she wanted, and nobody in that room stopped her. I'd founded the firm 14 years earlier, 2 years before I met Renata at a gallery opening downtown, where she was working the coat check to pay off her marketing degree. Back then, it was just me, a drafting table set up in a converted garage on Zuni Street, and a single renovation client who paid me in 3 installments because his previous contractor had run off with the deposit. Renata used to bring me coffee at the office on Sunday mornings in a chipped blue mug she refused to replace no matter how many times I offered to buy her a new one, and she'd sit on the windowsill reading paperbacks while I drew. And I remember thinking I'd never met anyone who could make silence feel like company instead of loneliness. We got married 2 years after that, in her parents' backyard in Golden, with a borrowed sound system and a dog that kept stealing napkins off the tables. The firm grew slowly, then all at once. A boutique hotel renovation in Lodo that got us our first write-up in a regional design magazine. Then the Okonkwo Pavilion, a glass and cedar community center that put us on 2 more magazine covers over the next 3 years. Renata quit her marketing job around year 4 and told everyone, including me, that she was helping run things. She answered the office phone on Fridays. She hosted client dinners twice a year, usually around the holidays, and she was genuinely good at it. Warm, funny, the kind of person who remembered a client's kid's name after meeting them once. I let myself believe that mattered more than it actually did to the business because I loved her, and because confrontation had never been something I was built for. When my original business partner tried to push me out in year 6 over a disagreement about firm direction, I let my lawyer handle it quietly instead of fighting it myself in front of anyone. When Renata started keeping a separate credit card for convenience around year 9, I didn't ask what it was for. I told myself it wasn't worth the friction. I told myself a lot of things weren't worth the friction for a lot of years, and eventually that became its own kind of habit. There was a dinner, maybe year 7, celebrating the Okonkwo Pavilion's 2nd magazine cover, where a client's wife turned to Renata over dessert and said, "You two make such a good team. I can always tell which ideas are yours in the drawings." Renata just smiled and said something modest about supporting the vision, and I remember laughing along with the table, flattered on her behalf, not thinking twice about it. It was a small, warm moment. I didn't clock it as strange until much later, replaying it in Priya's office 2 years after the fact, wondering how many small moments like that one had quietly built a version of our history that had nothing to do with what actually happened at the drafting table at 2 in the morning. The first strange detail I actually noticed, the first one my stomach reacted to before my brain caught up, came about 2.5 years ago. I noticed the Sorensen referral, a $6,000 finder's fee from a lake house client who'd sent his brother-in-law our way for a remodel, never showed up on the books. I mentioned it to our bookkeeper, Noor Delgado, and she said it might have been an invoicing error on our end and she'd track it down. I told myself it was nothing. The market had been slow that quarter anyway, and slow quarters make everything look like it's missing money that never actually existed. Then it happened again, 8 months later, with the Bellamy renovation, another referral fee, another gap in the ledger Noor couldn't fully explain. Then a third time, an $11,000 fee tied to a referral from the Whitfield project up in Boulder, gone the same way the other 2 had gone. 3 separate times, over 2 years, I told myself the same story. A slow market, a filing error, nothing worth raising with my wife of 11 years over dinner. I did bring it up with Renata once, casually, standing in the kitchen while she was scrolling on her phone. I asked if she remembered anything about the Sorensen fee, whether maybe she'd handled that invoice herself since she sometimes fielded calls from that family. She barely looked up. "Probably Noor's spreadsheet," she said. "You know she's been overwhelmed since the Okonkwo project wrapped." It was such a small, reasonable answer that I let it go completely. That's the thing nobody tells you about being lied to by someone you trust. The lie doesn't have to be good. It just has to be small enough that fighting it feels petty. I brought money up one more time, almost a year later, in a counseling session we'd started attending after a stretch of arguments that didn't seem to be about anything specific, but kept happening anyway. Our therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Okonjo, who kept a bowl of butterscotch candies on the side table, asked us each to name one thing we wished the other person understood better. I said I wished Renata would talk to me more openly about money, that I'd noticed some gaps in the referral fees and it had been bothering me quietly for months. Renata's face did something complicated. needed. Hurt, mostly, or something that looked exactly like hurt. And she said she couldn't believe that after everything she'd given up for this marriage, I was accusing her of stealing from her own family's business. Dr. Okonjo gently redirected the conversation toward feelings of being unseen and underappreciated, and by the end of the session, I was the one apologizing. I remember walking to the car afterward feeling like I'd done something wrong, even though I couldn't have told you what. That was the last time I brought it up directly. It would be another full year before I understood exactly what I'd walked away from that day. Renata filed for divorce 14 months ago on a Thursday by text message while I was in a client meeting. The next week, her attorney sent formal notice that she intended to claim half the firm's appraised value on the grounds that she'd co-built the business throughout the marriage. I remember reading that phrase, co-built, standing in my own kitchen with the dog barking at something outside and a grocery list still stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like the flatirons and feeling the floor tilt slightly under me. Neither of us had updated that list in months. It just stayed there, a small stupid artifact of a life that had already ended without officially telling me. I hired Priya Anand, a business divorce attorney with 19 years handling cases exactly like mine. Closely held companies, one spouse who'd built the asset from nothing, one spouse claiming an equitable interest in whatever it grew into. Her office was on the 9th floor of a building downtown with a view of the mountains she said she never had time to actually look at. She read through everything I brought her, the original incorporation papers, 12 consecutive years of joint tax returns, a post-nuptial agreement we drafted once and never quite gotten around to signing, and then she asked me a question that made my hands go cold before I fully understood why she was asking it. Has Renata reported any self-employment income at all in any of the last several years? Anything, even a small amount? I told her I didn't know. I told her I'd have to check. Priya didn't say anything for a second. Then she pulled up our joint filings on her laptop, scrolled to Schedule K1, and tapped the screen next to Box 14, self-employment earnings, 12 consecutive years. Every single one read 0.00 next to Renata's name. She's about to walk into a courtroom and tell a judge she built a company, Priya said, and her own signature, filed under penalty of perjury, says she made nothing from it. Not once, not ever, in 12 years. I told her that didn't necessarily settle anything. Renata always described the household work she did as unpaid, uncounted labor that still counted toward building the business, the classic argument, the one that's won 100 cases like this before. Priya nodded like she'd heard that exact framing 100 times because she had, and said the K1s weren't the whole case. They were the opening. People rarely lie about just one thing, she said. Usually there's something underneath it. I want to know why she's this confident going in. Confidence like that is either earned or it's covering for something. That confidence turned out to be its own kind of evidence. About 3 months before trial, Noor came to my office with something that had been bothering her for weeks. All 3 of the missing referral fees she'd finally traced led back, eventually, through a chain of invoices and a client email she'd stumbled on by accident, to a business called Marchetti Design Consulting. Marchetti, Renata's maiden name. A business I'd never once heard mentioned in 11 years of marriage. I brought it straight to Priya. She brought in a forensic accountant named Dana Whitfield. 14 years doing exactly this kind of financial reconstruction, mostly for divorce and shareholder dispute cases. Priya told me not to say a single word to Renata about it, not to change my routine, not to let anything slip that might tip her off that we'd noticed. Let her keep believing the story she's built for herself, Priya said. That story is going to be the thing that convicts her testimony on the stand, not us. Dana worked quietly for 11 weeks. She pulled Colorado Secretary of State business filings, subpoenaed 3 years of bank records from 2 different institutions, cross-referenced invoice dates against client project timelines. By the time trial started, she had a sealed report sitting in Priya's briefcase that neither Renata nor her own attorney, a sharp, visibly exhausted man named Grant Holloway, had any idea existed. Discovery took 5 months longer than Priya originally estimated, mostly because Grant Holloway fought every records request his client's side received. He filed 2 motions to quash subpoenas for Renata's personal bank accounts, arguing they were irrelevant to a claim about the business. A discovery magistrate, a soft-spoken man named Everett Prynne, who'd clearly seen every version of this fight before, denied both motions and ordered the records produced within 30 days, noting in his written order that a party's undisclosed income is directly relevant to a claim of having contributed labor without compensation. I sat for my own deposition that same month, 6 hours across 2 days, answering Grant's questions about who handled which parts of the business, who'd signed which contracts, whether Renata had ever been present at closings or permit hearings. I answered honestly every time. She'd been present at dinners, at open houses, at the magazine photo shoot for the Okonkwo Pavilion. She'd never once been present at a closing, a permit hearing, or a contract signing in 14 years, and saying that out loud, under oath for the first time, felt like setting down something heavy I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. We tried mediation twice before trial got scheduled. Both times, Renata's number for a settlement stayed exactly the same, half the firm's appraised value, which our jointly agreed business valuation valuation expert Dr. Absalom Renner had placed at just over $4. $2 million after reviewing 14 years of project contracts, tax filings, and comparable regional firms. Half of that was $2.1 million, and she wanted it framed publicly, in writing, as compensation for co-building the business, not just a division of marital property. Both times, Priya countered with a number based on the firm's value at the date of our marriage, plus reasonable appreciation over the years. Real money, fair by any standard, but with no ownership language attached anywhere in the offer. Both times, Renata stood up and walked out of the room before her own attorney had finished reading the counteroffer aloud. I remember watching her walk out the second time, chin level, completely sure of herself, and thinking, she actually believes this. That thought sat worse with me than if she'd simply been lying to my face. Lying to my face would have meant she knew the truth and chose to hide it. This meant she'd spent a long time convincing herself first, before she ever had to convince anyone else. So it went to trial. Judge Louisa Byrne presided, 11 years on the bench, known around the courthouse for letting witnesses talk themselves into corners before anyone else in the room said a single word. Before Renata ever took the stand, the court spent most of the first day and a half building the foundation nobody watching from the gallery would think twice about, but that Priya had been building toward for months. Dr. Renner went first, on the stand for nearly 2 hours, walking the court through the firm's valuation history line by line. Steady, unspectacular growth tied almost entirely to specific projects with my name on the drawings and my stamp on the permits. No capital contribution from Renata anywhere in the corporate records, no equity documentation, no partnership filing of any kind in 14 years of the business existing. He'd built a spreadsheet mapping every project against who'd signed the contract, who'd stamped the drawings, and who'd appeared on the firm's insurance policies as a covered party. My name appeared on all three, every single year. Renata's name appeared on none of them. Grant Holloway tried to poke holes in the valuation methodology, asking whether intangible contributions, like client relationships and social capital, had been factored in. Dr. Sae Renner said intangible contributions could be factored in when there was documentation connecting a specific person to a specific client relationship, and that his review of the file hadn't turned up any such documentation naming Renata. Judge Byrne asked her own follow-up questions about comparable firm valuations in the Denver metro and let the numbers stand as presented. Noor testified next, and her part of the afternoon ran longer than anyone expected. She walked the court through the referral fee ledger year by year, the 3 missing payments, and the exact dates each one had stopped appearing in the books. All of them, she confirmed under Grant Holloway's cross-examination, falling within 18 months of when Marchetti Design Consulting had been registered with the state, a fact she hadn't known when she first noticed the gaps, only when Dana Whitfield's timeline was laid next to her own. Grant objected that this was speculative, that correlation wasn't causation, that his client had no obligation to explain gaps in someone else's bookkeeping. Judge Byrne overruled him and asked Noor to read the 3 dates into the record a second time, slowly, so the court reporter could get them exactly right. Our senior project architect, Colin Petrakis, 9 years with the firm, testified after Noor about day-to-day operations, who assigned projects, who reviewed drawings, who sat across the table during the rare disputes with contractors. He said Renata had never attended a design review in the time he'd worked there, not once, and that the only meetings he could recall her joining were the holiday dinners and one groundbreaking ceremony for the Okonkwo Pavilion, where she'd cut a ribbon for the local news cameras. He wasn't unkind about it. He just answered the questions he was asked, plainly, the way an engineer answers things, and somehow that plainness did more damage to Renata's version of events than an hour of pointed cross-examination could have. By the second morning, I could feel something had shifted in the room, the way weather changes before it actually turns, a pressure drop you notice in your ears before you see a single cloud. Renata still looked composed on the outside. Her hands were steadier than mine had been in weeks. A friend of hers, Colette, testified as a character witness that morning too, describing dinner parties Renata had hosted, a few tense phone calls she'd helped smooth over with an unhappy client during a kitchen remodel gone wrong. It was warm testimony, and some of it was true. Priya's cross-examination was short. 3 questions about whether Colette had ever seen a contract, a paycheck stub, or a business card with Renata's name and title on it from the firm. Colette said no to all 3, quietly, looking a little confused about why it mattered. Then Grant called Renata to the stand, and she got her 40 minutes. She described 11 years of client dinners in careful detail, the menus, the seating charts, which clients needed to be kept away from which other clients after a wine-fueled argument at the Bellamy closing party. She described managing the calendar so Julian could focus on the design work, fielding calls from unhappy clients late at night so I wouldn't have to deal with the stress of it, personally introducing 3 of our biggest referral clients over the years through connections left over from her old marketing job. She said the words, "we built," and "our firm" so many times I lost count somewhere around minute 20, and Grant kept nodding along at his table like each repetition was another brick laid on solid ground. Some of what she said was true. She had hosted those dinners. She had smoothed things over over more than once, genuinely, in ways that had made my life easier at the time, and some small, stubborn part of me still felt a flicker of the old gratitude listening to her describe it, even knowing what I now knew. She just left out that Noor had run the office calendar since year 3. She left out that the 3 referrals she named under oath, specifically by name, were the exact same 3 whose fees had quietly vanished from our books over the last 2 years. She left out that the late-night calls she used to field had mostly stopped around the same time a business under her maiden name had quietly started taking client calls of its own from a co-working space 2 miles from our house. Priya let her say every word of it. She didn't interrupt once, didn't so much as shift in her chair, just kept writing on her legal pad in that same even hand. My jaw ached from clenching it by the time Renata finished, and my hands, folded under the table where nobody could see them, wouldn't stop moving. I kept thinking about the chipped blue mug still sitting in a cabinet at the house neither of us lived in anymore, and how easy it would have been for the last 12 years to actually be what she was describing if she'd only let them be. Nothing further, Grant said, and sat down looking like a man who thought he'd just had a genuinely good morning in court. Priya stood up slowly, walked to the center of the room, and didn't ask a single question about dinners or calendars or 12 years of marriage. Mrs. Feld, she said, can you tell the court what self-employment income you reported on Schedule K1, Box 14, for each of the 12 years you've just described building this company? The room went quiet in a way I felt in my chest before I understood it. Renata's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a second. She glanced toward Grant. Grant was staring down at his own copy of the tax filings like he was seeing them for the first time, because I realized later watching his face change, he was. He'd taken her account of things at his word the same way I once had, and never actually pulled the K1s himself to check. The filings reflect what our accountant prepared each year, Renata said. Her voice had gone thin, quieter than it had been all morning. They reflect $0 every single year filed under your own signature, Priya said. So my question stands, Mrs. Feld. If you built this company alongside your husband, where is 12 years of your income from it? Grant Holloway stood up so fast his chair scraped audibly across the floor. Your Honor, I need to request a recess. Judge Byrne looked at the clock, then at Renata, whose hands, steady all morning, steady through Colette's testimony, steady through her own 40 minutes on the stand, had finally started to shake. We'll take 15 minutes, she said, and gavelled the room to a stop. I didn't move right away. My own hands weren't steady either, but for a different reason than Renata's. My stomach dropped the way it does right before something you've been dreading finally arrives, except this wasn't dread. I couldn't put a name to what it actually was yet, sitting there in the sudden noise of a courtroom emptying out around me. In the hallway outside 4C, Dana Whitfield opened her sealed folder for the first time in front of anyone besides Priya and me. Marchetti Design Consulting, LLC, registered 23 months earlier under Renata's maiden name, using a residential address 2 blocks from a co-working space in Cherry Creek. 3 invoices, each one billed directly to the Sorensen, Bellamy, and Whitfield project referrals, the exact clients whose fees had disappeared from our books. For independent design consulting services Renata had never disclosed to me, never listed on a single tax return, and never once mentioned across 11 years of marriage, including a stretch of couples counseling 2 years earlier, where honesty about money had been the entire topic of 3 separate sessions. Total diverted, according to Dana's bank record reconciliation, 2/12/346/18, traced dollar for dollar. If this goes in front of the judge, Priya said quietly, watching Grant Holloway pace the hallway with his phone pressed hard against his ear, her ownership claim doesn't just fail today. It becomes a fraud referral, undisclosed income, unreported earnings, active diversion of client funds during a pending divorce proceeding. A prosecutor could do a great deal with a paper trail this clean. I asked Dana how long she'd known, how long that folder had been sitting finished in Priya's briefcase, while I sat through 2 days of testimony not knowing. About 6 weeks, she said. Priya wanted to wait until the K1s were already on the record before we showed our hand on the LLC. If we'd led with the shell company, their side could have argued it was unrelated personal business activity, nothing to do with the marriage. Leading with the sworn tax filings first meant she had to answer for the zero income under oath before anyone even mentioned Marchetti Consulting. By the time this comes out, the story tells itself. I understood then why Priya hadn't let me read the report early, even when I'd asked twice. She wasn't protecting Renata, she was protecting the sequence. Renata came out of a side room near the elevators while we were still standing there, flanked by Grant and a paralegal I didn't recognize, and for 1 second, our eyes met across the hallway. She didn't say anything, neither did I. There wasn't anything left that either of us could have said that the last 2 days hadn't already said for us, and after a moment, she looked away first and let the paralegal steer her toward the stairwell instead of the elevator, away from where we were standing. 15 minutes turned into almost 40. When court finally resumed, Grant asked to approach the bench before Renata was recalled to the stand. I couldn't hear the whole exchange from where I sat, but I watched Judge Byrne's expression stay perfectly flat the entire time Grant spoke, and I watched Renata's face across the room. Not angry anymore, not composed exposed anymore either, just gray, like all the color had been quietly called back inside her. When Grant Holloway stood again, he told the court his client was withdrawing her claim to any ownership interest in Feld Architecture, effective immediately. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody in the gallery gasped. Judge Byrne just nodded once, made a short note, and asked Priya whether we intended to pursue the diverted fee evidence in a separate civil action. Priya said we did. The judge said that was a matter for a different filing, not this proceeding, thanked both sides for their time, and moved on to scheduling the remainder of the property division. The whole exchange took less than 4 minutes. I remember thinking, walking out into the hallway afterward, that it seemed almost unfair how quiet the actual ending was. After 2 days of testimony and 14 months of filings and 2.5 years of gaps in a ledger, I'd talked myself out of questioning. No one in that hallway looked like they'd just watched anything at all. Renata didn't look at me on her way out of the courtroom. I found out later, through Priya, what the alternative to withdrawing that claim would have looked like on paper. A fraud referral to the district attorney's economic crimes unit, the same office that had prosecuted 2 nearly identical diversion cases the year before. Grant recommended she avoid that outcome by any means available to her, and she took the recommendation. She signed a full settlement 3 weeks later. No ownership claim of any kind, no equitable share of the firm, full repayment of the diverted fees over 18 months, and an acknowledgement buried quietly in paragraph 9 that she had received no income of any kind from Feld Architecture during the marriage. I didn't ask for an apology anywhere in that process. I don't think one was ever coming, and by then, I'd mostly stopped needing it the way I once thought I would. For a while after, I kept waiting to feel something bigger than I did. Relief, maybe, or something closer to vindication. The kind you see on people's faces in movies when a verdict finally lands. Mostly what I felt was tired. The specific kind of tired that comes after holding your breath for longer than you realized. I went back to the office the Monday after the settlement was signed and worked through a stack of permit revisions for a client in Cherry Hills, and it was such an ordinary afternoon. Noor complaining about a printer jam, Colin arguing with a contractor over a beam spec on speakerphone, that I had to stop at my desk for a second and just let it be ordinary. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed ordinary until I got it back. Marchetti Design Consulting dissolved 4 months later. I heard about it secondhand, from Noor, who'd heard it from someone at the co-working space in Cherry Creek where Renata used to rent a desk twice a week. It's been almost a year now. 2 of the 3 clients she'd quietly diverted business from, the Sorensen family and the Bellamys, reached out to the firm directly this spring, both of them a little sheepish about it, both asking whether I still handled projects myself or just signed off on drawings other people made. I told them I still draft every set of plans that leaves this office. I always have. I still have the chipped blue mug. It sits on a shelf in my office now, next to a scale model of the Okonkwo Pavilion, and I never got around to explaining to anyone at the firm why I kept it. Noor asked once, half joking, if it was some kind of good luck charm. I told her it wasn't luck. It was just a reminder of what was actually true about those early years underneath the version that almost became official record, that I'd built this alone, on a drafting table in a garage, one project at a time, long before anyone else's name got attached to the story. That was the part she got wrong in that courtroom, the part that ended up costing her far more than the money ever could have. She hadn't built the company with me. She'd spent 12 years quietly building a smaller, separate one off the side of it, and when it finally came time to prove which was which, all it took was one question and a single line on a form she'd signed herself every year, without ever once imagining anyone would think to ask.